Thank you very much. I know there are people in this room who have family and friends in Gaza, as I do. And the last contact I've been able to have with people I know in Gaza is 3 or 4 weeks ago. I don't know if they're alive or dead. And all of us who spent significant time in Gaza, I think every waking moment is colored by this almost unfathomable slaughter. And whatever I feel is a pale reflection, I know, of what many of you in this room are enduring. But I want you to know that there are many of us that are doing everything humanly possible to fight back.
Hello again. Fifth time's a charm, huh? Well, you already know my stance on calling for a ceasefire by now. But my purpose today is to speak to you as a father of a 2-year-old boy and a baby girl on the way. My wife, who's standing right behind me here, is 7 months pregnant, and we can't wait to meet our baby girl. So in honor of my pregnant wife and my future baby girl, I'd like to focus this speech on the pregnant women of Gaza. So I'm going to start off with one of the most horrific stories that happened just last week. An Israeli tank ran over a pregnant Palestinian woman back and forth until the fetus came out of her body. Do I need to repeat this again for you? Do you think I enjoy telling this story? Hell no. But do you need to hear it? Absolutely. Why? Because I'd like you to tell me how this act of pure evil is Israel defending itself. How this act of pure evil is targeting or thwarting Hamas. Imagine being a father that witnesses this happen to your wife and unborn child. Would you as a father sit there idly for the rest of your life doing nothing, or join a resistance against the oppression of barbaric murder of your people? This is just one of the thousands and thousands of stories. There are 50,000 pregnant women in the Gaza Strip, according to the United Nations Population Fund, and more than 180 births taking place every day. The complete breakdown of the healthcare system, coupled with a lack of food, clean water, and proper sanitation, means that 50,000 pregnant women and 68,000 breastfeeding mothers in Gaza are facing the risk of preeclampsia, anemia, bleeding, infections, and death. And even when they give birth, there isn't enough fuel to keep incubators running, which results in deaths of many newborns. Premature births have also increased by 30%. As stressed and traumatized pregnant women face many challenges, such as walking long distances in search of safety, running away from bombs, and being crowded in unsafe shelters. And there's now a significant increase in miscarriages, congenital abnormalities, stillbirths, mental health disorders, and maternal deaths. And now there's no space left for newborns and not enough medical staff to care for them, thus resulting in newborns being grouped together and being abandoned for hours on end. And just a couple days ago, the Israeli occupation forces arrested and detained a pregnant woman as a hostage with no charges, which they do regularly. And speaking of hostages, you're about to hear a group of dehumanizing hypocrites that are here today asking for the release of their hostages without a mention of the over 10,000 Palestinian hostages being held, a majority of which are held without charge or due process. I'm standing here right now as a father and a husband to a pregnant wife, looking you directly in the eye, asking you to simply make a statement as a city, as human beings, saying that this needs to stop permanently. If you're unable to do this simple gesture because of pressure from a group of people that think Palestinians are subhuman, specifically those that contribute to some of your campaigns, then you are a failure of a human being and are simply heartless. So in the spirit of newborns and babies, here's a little nursery rhyme I wrote for you guys. It's time for you to swallow your pride and push these lying Zionists aside, because now you can no longer hide. It's time for you to take the side of human beings that have had their rights denied. It's time for you to call for an end to this genocide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Zionism, the establishment of the State of Israel, involved a monumental injustice to the Palestinians, an injustice that is only exacerbated over time and reached its climax, its most cruel climax in Gaza today. And I, as a Jew, feel a moral duty to support, to speak up for the Palestinian cause. And I think that all Jews also have a moral duty to stand up by the Palestinians in their hour of need.
Israel's Lebensraum master plan for Gaza, borrowed from the Nazis' depopulation of Jewish ghettos, is clear. Destroy infrastructure, medical facilities and sanitation, including access to clean water, block shipments of food and fuel, impose telecommunications blackouts, unleash indiscriminate industrial violence to kill and wound hundreds a day, let starvation and epidemics of infectious diseases, along with the daily massacres and the displacement of Palestinians from their homes, turn Gaza into a mortuary. Israel has killed or seriously wounded close to 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza, almost 1 in every 20 inhabitants. It has destroyed or damaged 60% of the housing. The safe areas to which some 2 million Gazans were instructed to flee in the south have been relentlessly bombed with thousands of casualties. Palestinians in Gaza now make up 80% of all the people facing famine or catastrophic hunger worldwide, according to the UN. Every person in Gaza is hungry. A quarter of the population are starving and struggling to find food and drinkable water. Famine is imminent. The 335,000 children under the age of 5 are at high risk of malnutrition. The some 50,000 pregnant women lack health care and adequate nutrition. Infants are dying in droves. Israeli political and military officials, as the South African jurists documented at the International Court of Justice, make no secret of their genocidal intent, nor of their vision of what comes next. In September, before the incursion into Israel by Hamas and other resistance fighters, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu displayed a map of what he called the new Middle East at a UN General Assembly meeting. Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem had all been incorporated into a greater Israel. Palestine had ceased to exist.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is an honor and a privilege for me to appear before you today on behalf of the Republic of South Africa. I wish to express my gratitude to the court for convening this hearing on the earliest possible date to entertain South Africa's requests for the indication of provisional measures in this matter. In our application, South Africa has recognized the ongoing Nakba of the Palestinian people through Israel's colonization since 1948, which has systematically and forcibly dispossessed, displaced, and fragmented the Palestinian people, deliberately denying them their internationally recognized inalienable right to self-determination and their internationally recognized right of return as refugees to their towns and villages in what is now the State of Israel. We are also particularly mindful of Israel's institutionalized regime of discriminatory laws, policies and practices designed and maintained to establish domination, subjecting the Palestinian people to apartheid on both sides of the Green Line. Decades-long impunity for widespread and systematic human rights violations has emboldened Israel in its recurrence and intensification of international crimes in Palestine. At the outset, South Africa acknowledges that the genocidal acts and omissions by the State of Israel inevitably form part of a continuum of illegal acts perpetrated against the Palestinian people since 1948. The application places Israel's genocidal acts and omissions within the broader context of Israel's 75-year apartheid, 56-year occupation, and 16-year siege imposed on the Gaza Strip, a siege which itself has been described by the director of UNRWA Affairs in Gaza as a silent killer of people.
The Palestinians are being forced to choose between death from bombs, disease, exposure, or starvation, or being driven from their homeland. There will soon reach a point where death will be so ubiquitous that deportation for those who want to live will be the only option. Israel is lobbying countries in Latin America and Africa to accept Palestinian refugees. Israeli leaders are calling this deportation, quote, voluntary migration. Voluntary migration is not a new concept in the annals of genocide. In the Warsaw Ghetto, the Nazis handed out 3 kilograms of bread and 1 kilogram of marmalade to anyone who voluntarily registered for deportation. There were times when hundreds of people had to wait in line for several hours to be deported. Marek Edelman, the only surviving commander of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, writes in his book, The Ghetto Fights. The number of people anxious to obtain 3 kilos of bread was such that the transports now leaving twice daily with 12,000 people could not accommodate them all. And Edelman, by the way, repeatedly condemned the Zionist state of Israel, calling it unviable, and supported Palestinian resistance, including armed resistance. The Nazis shipped their victims to death camps. The Israelis will ship their victims to squalid refugee camps in countries outside of Israel. This is the plan. No one, especially the Biden administration, intends to stop it.
As previously mentioned, the violence and the destruction in Palestine and Israel did not begin on the 7th of October 2023. The Palestinians have experienced systematic oppression and violence for the last 76 years. On 6 October 2023 and every day since October the 7th, 2023. In the Gaza Strip, at least since 2004, Israel continues to exercise control over the airspace, territorial waters, land crossing, water, electricity, and civilian infrastructure, as well as over key government functions. Entry and exit by air and sea to Gaza is strictly prohibited. No armed attack on a state territory, no matter how serious, even an attack involving atrocity crimes, can provide any justification for or defense to breaches to the convention, whether as a matter of law or morality. Israel's response to the 7th of October 2023 attack has crossed this line and give rise to the breaches of the convention.
I want to be very clear, and I know I've said this a million times, and y'all are probably sick of me following up on this, but that doesn't mean that we excuse any single innocent life lost. The right number of civilian casualties is 0, but there's no indication that we've seen that validates a claim of genocidal intent or action by the Israeli Defense Forces.
The most disturbing lesson I learned while covering armed conflicts for 2 decades is that we all have the capacity, with little prodding, to become willing executioners. The line between the victim and the victimizer is razor thin. The dark lusts of racial and ethnic supremacy, of vengeance and hate, of the eradication of those we condemn as embodying evil, are poisons that are not circumscribed by race, nationality, ethnicity, or religion. We can all become Nazis. It takes very little. And if we do not stand in eternal vigilance over evil, our evil, we become like those carrying out the mass killing in Gaza, monsters.
זכור את אשר עשה לך עמלק, נצטווינו. אנו זוכרים ואנו נלחמים.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
Very puzzled by the constant concern which the world is showing for the Palestinian people and is actually showing for these horrible, inhuman animals who have done the worst atrocities that this century has seen.
עזה לא תחזור להיות מה שהייתה וחמאס לא יהיה. חסל את הכל.
مع هيك وحوش بشرية رايحين نتعامل كيف لازم. إسرائيل فرضت إغلاق كامل على غزة.
هناك إسرائيليون يعني وصفوا الفلسطينيين في غزة وصفوهم بأنهم حيوانات بل أقل من حيوانات.
أنا لا أسويهم بالحيوانات لأن هذا تحقير للحيوانات.
هذا رأيك دكتور مردخاي؟
هذا رأيي.
תכסחו אותם כמה שיותר, שלא להשאיר מהם זכר. שלא הם, לא אמא שלהם, לא הילדה שלהם, לא התינוקות שלהם. אסור להם לחיות לחיות האלה. יש לך שכן ערבי, אתה לא תחכה שהוא יבוא אליך הביתה. תיכנס אליו הביתה ותירה.
תראה, לצורך לא, אתה חושב שאנחנו יכולים להרוג מאות אלפי פלסטינים ברצועת עזה והדבר הזה יעבור?
תראה, עכשיו בתקשורת הזרה יוצאת הודעה בשם ישראל שמיליון פלסטינים כבר ירדו מדרום הרצועה דרומה, וכל מי שנשאר שם נחשב כמחבל.
תשמיד את עזה עכשיו! עכשיו! עזה הופכת לדרזדן, כן!
הארץ שלנו!
South African lawyers at The Hague who compared Israel's crimes with those carried out by the apartheid regime in South Africa showed the court a video of Israeli soldiers celebrating and calling for the death of Palestinians. They sang as they danced, "There are no uninvolved civilians," as evidence that genocidal intent descends from the top to the bottom of the Israeli war machine and political system. Racism, an attribute of all colonial settler societies, whether the British colonists in India and Kenya or the French in Algeria, pervades Israeli society. Palestinians are seen as vermin, to be controlled or exterminated.
Our governments lie non-stop. John Kirby at the White House almost never says a sentence of truth, except by accident or because it's incidental. Our State Department almost never speaks the truth. The Israeli government lies from morning till night. But in the court, you don't get away with that. And what was interesting for me in the court proceedings was the methodical nature in which the court, in a short period of time, said, look, this looks to be happening and it has to stop. Now, immediately, Netanyahu and the State Department, because they are completely complicit in this, said, oh, Israel's already doing all of these things. Nobody should believe that for one moment. Israel has been murdering civilians. And by the way, there are clips of murder in cold blood. I just watched one today by ITV where people, Palestinian men waving a white flag, were gunned down by the Israelis in cold blood. And of course, the dropping of bombs, you don't get to 28,000 dead. Those are the ones counted, not the ones under the rubble.
Right.
You don't get to 28,000 dead, 70% women and children, by taking care. But what's interesting about our world is we're exactly in the world of George Orwell, 1984. They say whatever they want. The Israelis lie, the State Department lies, the White House lies, but the Court of Public Opinion and the International Court of Justice is not going to accept that. So Israel is on the path of being found to be committing genocide. It didn't happen today, but that's the path that they're on. They can fake it, they can lie, they can say whatever they want, but the devastating record that they are creating is going to haunt them for generations to come.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is a privilege to appear on behalf of the Republic of South Africa in this case of exceptional importance. It's a case that underscores the very essence of our shared humanity as expressed in the preamble to the Genocide Convention. It's my task to address the court on the genocidal acts that have led to this urgent request for provisional measures under Article 41 of the Statute of the Court. South Africa contends that Israel has transgressed Article 2 of the Convention by committing actions that fall within the definition of genocide. The actions show a systematic pattern of conduct from which genocide can be inferred. Allow me to place these acts in context. Gaza is one of the two constituent territories of the occupied Palestinian territories, occupied by Israel since 1967. It is a narrow strip of approximately 365 square kilometers, as depicted in the map now displayed. Israel continues to exercise control over the space, territorial waters, land crossings, water, electricity, electromagnetic sphere, and civilian infrastructure in Gaza, as well as over key governmental functions. As the Honourable Minister has said, entry and exit by air and sea to Gaza is prohibited, with Israel operating the only two crossing points. Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated places in the world, is home to approximately 2.3 million Palestinians, almost half of them children. For the past 96 days, Israel has subjected Gaza to what has been described as one of the heaviest conventional bombing campaigns in the history of modern warfare. Palestinians in Gaza are being killed by Israeli weaponry and bombs from air, land, and sea. They are also at immediate risk of death by starvation, dehydration, and disease as a result of the ongoing siege by Israel, the destruction of Palestinian towns, the insufficient aid being allowed through to the Palestinian population, and the impossibility of distributing this limited aid while bombs fall. This conduct renders essentials to life unobtainable. At this provisional measures stage, as this court has made clear in the Gambia-Myanmar case, it is not necessary for the court to come to a final view on the question of whether Israel's conduct constitutes genocide. It is necessary to establish only whether at least some of the acts alleged are capable of falling within the provisions of the Convention. On analyzing the specific and ongoing genocidal acts complained of, it is clear that at least some, if not all of these acts, fall within the Convention's provisions. These acts are documented in detail in South Africa's application, and confirmed by reliable, often UN sources. It's thus unnecessary and impossible for me to recount all of them.
The moral universe has now been turned upside down. Those of us who oppose genocide are accused of advocating it. Those who carry out genocide are said to have the right to defend themselves. Vetoing ceasefires and providing 2,000-pound bombs to Israel that throw out metal fragments for thousands of feet in densely packed refugee camps is the road to peace. Refusing to negotiate will free the hostages. Bombing hospitals, schools, mosques, churches, ambulances, and refugee camps, obliterating families are routine acts of war. Carrying out genocide in Gaza is a way to de-radicalize Palestinians. Attacking Houthi bases in Yemen will de-escalate a regional conflict. And remember, it is not only Israel which has abandoned its citizens held hostage in Gaza. There are hundreds of Palestinians who are U.S. citizens or permanent residents trapped in Gaza, and the Biden administration is making no discernible effort, as demanded by U.S. law, to secure their safety.
I saw in Auschwitz that if a dominant group wants to dehumanize others, so as the Nazis wanted to dehumanize me, these dominant group must first be dehumanized in a way themselves by diminishing their empathy due to propaganda and indoctrination in order to be able to be as cruel as some were. Okay, but the same holds nowadays for Israel. I am appalled about how hateful, how dehumanized, that they do not see any human aspect in any Palestinian anymore. It's terrible. The Zionists have not any right whatsoever to use the Holocaust for any purpose. They have given up everything which has to do with humanity, with empathy. For one thing, the state, the blood and soil, just like the Nazis. I was educated, I learned at school about blood and soil, and that's exactly their idea too. And humans do not play a role. Judaism, as I learned it, is highly ethical. And so you cannot connect Zionism with highly ethical. You can only connect the words aggressive, oppressive, stealing, robbing with Zionism, but not highly ethical. Zionism and Judaism are contrary to each other because Judaism is universal and humane, and Zionism is exactly the opposite. It is very narrow, very nationalistic, racist, colonialist, and all this. There is no national Judaism. There is Zionism and there is Judaism, and they are completely different.
I move now to demonstrate, in turn, how Israel's conduct violates Articles 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D of the Convention. The first genocidal act committed by Israel is the mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza, in violation of Article 2A of the Genocide Convention. As the UN Secretary General explained 5 weeks ago, the level of Israel's killing is so extensive that nowhere is safe in Gaza. As I stand before you today, 23,210 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces during the sustained attacks over the last 3 months. At least 70% of whom are believed to be women and children. Some 7,000 Palestinians are still missing, presumed dead under the rubble. Palestinians in Gaza are subjected to relentless bombing wherever they go. They are killed in their homes, in places where they seek shelter, in hospitals, in schools, in mosques, in churches, and as they try to find food and water for their families. They have been killed if they failed to evacuate. In the places to which they have fled, and even while they attempted to flee along Israeli-declared safe routes. The level of killing is so extensive that those whose bodies are found are buried in mass graves, often unidentified. In the first 3 weeks alone, following 7 October, Israel deployed 6,000 bombs per week. At least 200 times it has deployed 2,000-pound bombs in southern areas of Palestine designated as safe. These bombs have also decimated the north, including refugee camps. 2,000-pound bombs are some of the biggest and most destructive bombs available. They are dropped by lethal fighter jets that are used to strike targets on the ground by one of the world's most resourced armies. Israel has killed an unparalleled and unprecedented number of civilians, with the full knowledge of how many civilian lives each bomb will take. More than 1,800 families, Palestinian families in Gaza, have lost multiple family members, and hundreds of multi-generational families have been wiped out, with no remaining survivors. Mothers, fathers, children, siblings, grandparents, aunts, cousins, often all killed together. This killing is nothing short of destruction of Palestinian life. It is inflicted deliberately. No one is spared, not even newborn babies. The scale of Palestinian child killings in Gaza is such that UN chiefs have described it as a graveyard for children. The devastation, we submit, is intended to and has laid waste to Gaza beyond any acceptable, legal, let alone humane justification. The second genocidal act identified in South Africa's application is Israel's infliction of serious bodily or mental harm to Palestinians in Gaza in violation of Article 2B of the Genocide Convention. Israel's attacks have left close to 60,000 Palestinians wounded and maimed. Again, the majority of them women and children. This in circumstances where the healthcare system has all but collapsed. I'll return to this later in my speech. Large numbers of Palestinian civilians, including children, are arrested, blindfolded, forced to undress, and loaded onto trucks taken to unknown locations. The suffering of the Palestinian people, physical and mental, is undeniable. Turning to the third genocidal act under Article 2C. Israel has deliberately imposed conditions on Gaza that cannot sustain life and are calculated to bring about its physical destruction. Israel achieves this in at least 4 ways. First, by displacement. Israel has forced the displacement of about 85% of Palestinians in Gaza. There is nowhere safe for them to flee to. Those who cannot leave or refuse to be displaced have either been killed or at extreme risk of being killed in their homes. Many Palestinians have been displaced multiple times as families are forced to move repeatedly in search of safety. Israel's first evacuation order on 13 October required the evacuation of over 1 million people, including children, the elderly, the wounded, and infirm. Entire hospitals were required to evacuate, even newborn babies in intensive care. The order required them to evacuate the north to the south within 24 hours. The order itself was genocidal. It required immediate movement, taking only what could be carried, while no humanitarian assistance was permitted, and fuel, water, and food, and other necessities of life had deliberately been cut off. It was clearly calculated to bring about the destruction of the population. For many Palestinians, the forced evacuation from their homes is inevitably permanent. Israel has now damaged or destroyed an estimated 355,000 Palestinian homes, leaving at least 500,000 Palestinians with no home to return to. The Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Internally Displaced Persons explains that houses and infrastructure, quote, have been razed to the ground, frustrating any realistic prospects for displaced Gazans to return home, repeating a long history of mass forced displacement of Palestinians by Israel. There is no indication at all that Israel accepts responsibility for rebuilding what it has destroyed. Instead, the destruction is celebrated by the Israeli army. Soldiers film themselves joyfully detonating entire apartment blocks and town squares, erecting the Israeli flag over the wreckage, seeking to re-establish Israeli settlements on the rubble of Palestinian homes, and thus extinguishing the very basis of Palestinian life in Gaza. Second, together with the forced displacement, Israel's conduct has been deliberately calculated to cause widespread hunger, dehydration, and starvation. Israel's campaign has pushed Gazans to the brink of famine. An unprecedented 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger. Of all the people in the world currently suffering catastrophic hunger, more than 80% are in Gaza. The situation is such that the experts are now predicting that more Palestinians in Gaza may die from starvation and disease than airstrikes. And yet Israel continues to impede the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians, not only refusing to allow sufficient aid in, but removing the ability to distribute it through constant bombardment and obstruction. Just 3 days ago, on 8 January, a planned mission by UN agencies to deliver urgent medical supplies and vital fuel to a hospital and medical supply center was denied by Israeli authorities. This marked the 5th denial of a mission to the center since 26 December, leaving 5 hospitals in northern Gaza without access to life-saving medical supplies and equipment. Aid trucks that are allowed in are seized upon by the hungry. What is provided is simply not enough. Israel has deliberately inflicted conditions in which Palestinians in Gaza are denied adequate shelter, clothes, or sanitation. For weeks, there have been acute shortages of clothes, bedding, blankets, and critical non-food items. Clean water is all but gone, leaving far below the amount required to safely drink, clean, and cook. Accordingly, the WHO has stated that Gaza is experiencing soaring rates of infectious disease outbreaks. Cases of diarrhea in children under 5 years of age have increased 2,000% since hostilities began. When combined and left untreated, malnutrition and disease create a deadly cycle. The fourth genocidal act under Article 2B is Israel's military assault on Gaza's healthcare system, which renders life unsustainable. Even by 7 December, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health noted that the healthcare of infrastructure in the Gaza Strip has been completely obliterated. Those wounded by Israel in Gaza are being deprived of life-saving medical care. Gaza's healthcare system, already crippled by years of blockade and prior attacks by Israel, is unable to cope with the sheer scale of the injuries. Finally, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has pointed to acts committed by Israel that would fall under the fourth category of genocidal acts in Article 2D of the Convention. On 22 November, she expressly warned the following: the reproductive violence inflicted by Israel on Palestinian women, newborn babies, infants, and children could be qualified as acts of genocide under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, including imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group. Israel is blocking the delivery of life-saving aid, including essential medical kits for delivering babies, in circumstances where an estimated 180 women are giving birth in Gaza each day. Of these 180 women, the WHO warns that 15% are likely to experience pregnancy or birth-related complications and need additional medical care. That care is simply not available. In sum, Madam President, all of these acts, individually and collectively, form a calculated pattern of conduct by Israel, indicating a genocidal intent. This intent is evident from Israel's conduct in specially targeting Palestinians living in Gaza, using weaponry that causes large-scale homicidal destruction, as well as targeted sniping of civilians, designating safe zones for Palestinians to seek refuge, and then bombing these, depriving Palestinians in Gaza of basic needs: food, water, healthcare, fuel, sanitation, and communications, destroying social infrastructure, homes, schools, mosques, churches, hospitals, and killing, seriously injuring, and leaving large numbers of children orphaned. Genocides are never declared in advance. But this court has the benefit of the past 13 weeks of evidence that shows incontrovertibly a pattern of conduct and related intention that justifies a plausible claim of genocidal acts. In the Gambia-Myanmar case, this court did not hesitate to impose provisional measures in relation to allegations that Myanmar was committing genocidal acts against the Rohingya within the Rakhine State. The facts before the court today are sadly even more stark, and like the Gambia-Myanmar case, deserve and demand this court's intervention. Every day, there is mounting irreparable loss of life, property, dignity, and humanity for the Palestinian people. Our news feeds show graphic images of suffering that has become unbearable to watch. Nothing will stop the suffering except an order from this court. Without an indication of provisional measures, the atrocities will continue, with the Israeli Defense Force indicating that it intends pursuing this course of action for at least a year. In the words of the UN Under-Secretary General on 5 January 2024, I quote, "You think getting aid into Gaza is easy? Think again. 3 layers of inspections before trucks can even enter. Confusion and long queues. A growing list of rejected items. A crossing point meant for pedestrians, not trucks. Another crossing point where trucks have been blocked by desperate, hungry communities. A destroyed commercial sector. Constant bombardments, poor communications, damaged roads, convoys shot at, delays at checkpoints, a traumatized and exhausted population crammed into a smaller and smaller sliver of land. Shelters which have long exceeded their full capacity. Aid workers themselves displaced, killed. This is an impossible situation for the people of Gaza and for those trying to help them. The fighting must stop." Close quote. Madam President, members of the court, that concludes my section on the genocidal conduct of Israel. I thank you for your patient attention.
שלא יהיה עוד פלסטין עשירי, צריך לחזור הביתה ולשלוט על השטח. וכן, גם להציע פתרון מוסרי והגיוני ותורמי והלכתי, עידוד הגירה וחוק עונש מוות למחבלים.
The argument for a Jewish state as compensation for the Holocaust was a powerful argument, so powerful that nobody listened to the outright rejection of the UN solution by the overwhelming majority of the people of Palestine, Pape writes. What comes out clearly is a European wish to atone. The basic and natural rights of the Palestinians should be sidelined, dwarfed and forgotten altogether for the sake of the forgiveness that Europe was seeking from the newly formed Jewish state. It was much easier to rectify the Nazi evil vis-a-vis a Zionist movement than facing the Jews of the world in general. It was less complex, and more importantly, it did not involve facing the victims of the Holocaust themselves, but rather a state that claimed to represent them. The price for this more convenient atonement was robbing the Palestinians of every basic and natural right they had and allowing the Zionist movement to ethnically cleanse them without fear of any rebuke or condemnation.
But this is the first time I've ever heard that there's a need to condemn. And say, yes, but of course they're suffering, but first we need to condemn. Are we out of our minds? Condemning the resistance of the people who are being oppressed and killed, subjected to genocide for 75 years? Are we out of our minds? Are we out of our minds? Are we outside of our minds when we let this ridiculous narrative take hold and spread and then participate in it, nodding our heads like sheep? Oh, and by the way, yes, there is a genocide going on and it's terrible. But first we have to condemn the Palestinians who dare to stand up. Palestinians who have shown an ability to sacrifice and amounts of courage that, as far as I can remember, are unprecedented, facing this horrific, horrific oppression. But what are we really talking about? Again, we've heard lists and lists and lists of crimes committed by the State of Israel. Lists and lists of crimes against humanity. And there's always seems to me like there's a little bit of a sense of surprise, a little bit of shock, a little bit as though this was somehow not predictable. What we are seeing now in Gaza was not only predictable, it was preventable. And we did not prevent it. The previous massacre in Gaza was predictable too, and that was not prevented. And we can go on and on and on and on back 75 years. Because what could possibly be expected from an apartheid regime established after a massive campaign, open massive campaign of ethnic cleansing, massacres, and the beginning of a genocide that is still going on today? What could possibly be expected? That was the founding moment of the State of Israel. Close to 1 million people forced out of their land. God knows how many were massacred. And that was the beginning. That was 1948. So now we're shocked. All these lists and lists and lists and lists, there's nothing new about them. Except this time the numbers are higher. This time the numbers are, even by Israeli standards, it is shocking. But this was predictable and this was preventable. And every time something happens, we rise, we protest, we demand, and we forget. Instead of standing there and demanding an end, an absolute end to the oppression and the killing of Palestinians, an end to it. Not a ceasefire to it, an end to it. A political solution that will guarantee the lives, the security, the safety of Palestinians. That has never been discussed. I don't recall it ever being discussed. That guarantees need to be put in place. Guarantees need to be put in place for the life and security and the safety of Palestinians, because Palestinians have been living in a state of terror for 75 years. Not just now, but for 75 years living in a state of terror, whether they're in the West Bank, whether they're in the Gaza Strip, whether they're citizens of the State of Israel or so-called citizens. They have been living in a state of terror, and they still do today. Granted, the level of terror has increased since October the 7th.
If one were to see the situation that is on the ground with Israeli bombs that are there for 20 days against the helpless Palestinian people, with 7,000 men, women, and small children, half of them children, killed by Israel in the last 20 days, 17,000 injured, 1.1 million Palestinians displaced. The enormity of the crimes that are being committed by Israel against the Palestinian people are so great and enormous that it is amazing that when my friend from Canada insists on naming the organization Hamas, that he does not feel the need for the equity and balance and fairness for which Canada is so well known. He does not feel the need to name Israel for killing 7,000 Palestinians and injuring 17,000. Only Hamas. Is this balance? He says what needs to be named has to be named. We believe Israel needs to be named. If you are fair, if you are equitable, if you are just, you will not blame one side and not the other. And if you were to go back to the issue of who started this, we all know who started this. It is 50 years of Israeli occupation and the murder and killing of Palestinians with impunity that started this. When you push a people into the corner, they will respond. This is what the Secretary General said. It did not happen in a vacuum. And look at the reaction that came from the Israeli representative, insulting the Secretary General, calling for his resignation. They can't face the truth. They can't face justice. They can't face the fact that the crime has originated with the Israelis. The Israeli occupation is the original sin in this case. It is not what happened on the 7th of October. That is a proximate cause. But the real cause is the occupation of Palestine.
Has always been a genocidal racist ideology which seeks to establish a Jewish state by specifically displacing or killing the indigenous inhabitants of Palestine. So in order to justify that in a world where there's a convention against genocide, where people think racism is a bad thing in general, they've got to find a way to undermine the idea that they're racist. And of course what they do is they say that anyone who criticizes them is themselves racist against the Jews. So that they have to blur the distinction between anti-Semitism, racism against the Jews, and anti-Zionism, which of course is an anti-racist position.
Don't be dishonest. I believe that the rulings of the court have been ignored by Israel. Hundreds of people have been killed in the last 3-4 days, and clearly Israel believes it has license to do as it wishes. So the world does have to reflect, because we're going to come to a point where we have to think, what do we do to stop such acts occurring, not just with Israel, but any party in the world. We know that we were unable to protect Rwandan citizens when they faced a massive slaughter and a genocide. We are allowing this to happen again right before our eyes on TV screens. South Africa has taken the bold step of approaching the ICJ. We succeeded with the provisional measures application. I think we now have to look at proposing other measures to the global community, but also securing international solidarity on this matter in support of the Palestinian people.
I knew Dr. Abdul Aziz al-Rantisi, the co-founder of Hamas, along with Sheikh Yassin. Al-Rantisi's family were expelled to the Gaza Strip by Zionist militias from historic Palestine during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. He did not fit the demonized image of a Hamas leader. He was a soft-spoken, articulate, and highly educated pediatrician who had graduated first in his class at Egypt's Alexandria University. As a 9-year-old boy, he had witnessed in Khan Yunis the executions of 275 Palestinian men and boys, including his uncle, when Israel briefly occupied the Gaza Strip in 1956, the subject of Joe Sacco's magisterial book, Footnotes in Gaza. Scores of Palestinians were also executed by Israeli soldiers in the neighboring town of Rafah, where today hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been forced to flee now that Khan Yunis is under attack. I still remember the wailing and the tears of my father over his brother Rantisi told me. I couldn't sleep for many months after that. It left a wound in my heart that can never heal. I'm telling you a story and I'm almost crying. This sort of action can never be forgotten. They planted hatred in our hearts. He knew he could never trust the Israelis. He knew that the goal of the Zionist state was the occupation of all of historic Palestine, and Israel would go on to seize Gaza and the West Bank in 1967, along with Syria's Golan Heights and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. And he knew the eternal subjugation or extermination of the Palestinian people was the goal of the Zionist movement. Al-Rantisi and Yassin were assassinated in 2004 by Israel. Al-Rantisi's widow, Jamila Abdallah Taha El-Shanti, had a doctorate in English and taught at the Islamic University in Gaza. The couple had 6 children, one of whom was killed along with his father. The family's home, where I visited them, was bombed and destroyed during the 2014 Israeli assault on Gaza known as Operation Protective Edge. Jamila was killed by Israel on October 19th of this year. We are called, as believers, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, to stand with the oppressed. We are called to defy malignant power, Atif, Rifat, and those like them who speak to us at the risk of death. Remind us of this injunction. They speak, so we will not be silent. They speak, so we will take these words and images and hold them up to the principalities of the world, the media, politicians, diplomats, universities, the wealthy and privileged, the weapons manufacturers, the Pentagon, and the Israel lobby, and demand that this genocide cease.
Hidden inside of this vessel, that shit is so exponential. I need a first class ticket to the top.